I never liked late-night calls, but the money was too good to pass up. The dispatcher's voice was clipped, urgent. There was a problem with the relay tower on Black Pine Mountain, and I was the only technician within 100 miles. "We're getting interference," she said. "Strange signals. Static. Voices. The last guy up there didn't finish the job. We need you to check it out. Tonight." I hesitated, glancing at the rain streaking my apartment window. "What kind of voices?" I asked, half joking, half hoping for a rational answer. She paused. "Just get up there, Alex. Bring your own radio, and don't go alone if you can help it." But I was alone. I always was. I packed my toolkit, a flashlight, and my battered old shortwave receiver. The company van was waiting, headlights cutting through the drizzle. The dashboard clock blinked 11:47 p.m. as I pulled out of the lot, tires hissing on wet asphalt. The drive out of the city was uneventful, but as the miles ticked by, the world grew emptier. Streetlights faded, replaced by endless stretches of pine and fog. My phone lost signal halfway up the mountain road. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from my radio, which I kept tuned to the tower's emergency frequency. At first it was just static. Then, faintly, a voice. Garbled, distant, impossible to make out. I turned the volume up, but it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a low, rhythmic hiss. I told myself it was just atmospheric noise, maybe a stray signal bouncing off the clouds, but the hairs on my arms stood up anyway. The company's warning echoed in my mind. If you hear anything strange, don't respond. Just fix the tower and get out. I gripped the wheel tighter, headlights slicing through the mist. The mountain loomed ahead, black and silent. The radio tower's red beacon blinking like a warning in the dark. I was officially on the clock, and I was already wishing I'd said no. The road ended in a gravel lot choked with weeds, the van's headlights sweeping over a chain-link fence and a battered sign, "Authorized personnel only." Beyond it, the radio tower loomed, a skeletal giant of steel and blinking red lights, its base shrouded in swirling mist. The only other structure was a squat maintenance shack, its windows dark and door hanging slightly ajar. I killed the engine and stepped out, the night air colder than I expected, heavy with the scent of wet pine and ozone. My boots crunched on gravel as I crossed the shack, toolbox in hand, every sound amplified by the silence. The only noise was the low, constant hum of the tower's generator and the faint, ever-present static from my portable radio. Inside, the shack was cramped and cluttered, walls lined with old schematics, spare parts, and a battered desk. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting long shadows. On the desk sat the maintenance logbook, its pages curled and stained with coffee rings. I flipped through the entries, most of them routine, until the last one, dated 2 days ago, ended mid-sentence. Heard voices on the air again, not sure if... The rest was a jagged line, as if the pen had been yanked away. I set the logbook aside, unease prickling at my skin. The equipment rack in the corner buzzed with activity, lights blinking in erratic patterns. I ran diagnostics on the main transmitter, noting the interference readings spiking off the charts. The source wasn't local, at least not from any known station. I keyed the mic, testing the emergency frequency. "Tower 7, this is Alex, performing maintenance check. Please confirm status." My voice sounded small, swallowed by static. No reply. I tried again, switching channels, but only got more static, until, for a split second, I thought I heard a voice. It was faint, almost lost in the noise, but unmistakably human, or at least trying to be. I stepped outside, scanning the tree line. The fog had thickened, swirling around the tower's base. The red beacon blinked overhead, casting the world in pulses of crimson. I felt exposed, as if something unseen was watching from the darkness just beyond the fence. Back inside, I checked the backup generator and found it running, but the fuel gauge was lower than it should be. Someone, or something, had been here since the last log entry. I found muddy footprints near the back door, leading out into the woods. I radioed the company dispatcher, but only got a garbled response, the words lost in a wash of static. My phone was dead, no signal. I was truly alone. I sat at the desk, staring at the unfinished logbook entry, the silence pressing in. The only way out was through. Fix the tower, log the repair, and get off this mountain before the voices returned. But as I powered up the main console, the static on the emergency frequency began to rise, building into a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo my own heartbeat. I told myself it was just interference, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The tower wasn't just broken, it was broadcasting something it was never meant to carry, and whatever was on the other end was waiting for me to listen. I set to work, running diagnostics and checking cables, trying to focus on the familiar rhythm of my job, but the static on the emergency frequency kept building, a low hiss that crawled under my skin. I adjusted the dials, hoping to isolate the interference, but the signal only grew stronger, pulsing in time with the tower's red beacon outside. Then, through the static, a voice emerged, faint, garbled, but unmistakably calling my name. "Alex, help, please, Alex." I froze, my hand hovering over the receiver. The voice was warped, as if played backward or underwater, but it was my name, repeated again and again, each time more desperate. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to respond. "This is Alex. Who is this? Do you need assistance?" My voice sounded thin, uncertain. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the voice returned, clearer now, but wrong. Too many echoes, too many layers, as if several people were speaking at once. "Alex, it's so cold. Can't get out. Help us." A chill ran down my spine. I checked the logbook again, searching for any mention of missing personnel, but the last entry was still that jagged, unfinished line. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a prank or a stray signal bouncing off the mountains, but the voice knew my name. It sounded almost familiar, like someone I'd known long ago. I pressed the mic again. "Where are you? Can you tell me your location?" The static surged, drowning out the reply. Then, through the noise, a laugh, high-pitched, metallic, and utterly inhuman, crackled through the speakers. It was a sound that didn't belong on any frequency, a sound that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I yanked the headphones off, heart pounding. The laugh faded, replaced with a low, rhythmic chant, words in a language I didn't recognize. The equipment lights flickered, and the room seemed to grow colder. I tried to shut down the transmitter, but the controls were unresponsive. The static grew louder, filling the shack with a suffocating pressure. I could feel it in my bones, a vibration that threatened to shake me apart. Suddenly, the voice returned, louder than before, echoing from every speaker. "Alex, come outside! We need you!" I stumbled to the window, peering into the fog. The red beacon painted the world in pulses of blood. For a moment, I thought I saw movement near the base of the tower, a shadow, tall and thin, swaying in the mist. I backed away, forcing myself to breathe. This wasn't possible. Radios didn't do this. Voices didn't crawl out of the static and call you by name. I tried the company radio again, desperate for a human voice, but only got more static. My phone was still dead. I was cut off, alone, with the voices and the cold. I sat at the desk, hands shaking, as the static faded to a whisper. The voice spoke one last time, soft and pleading. "Don't leave us, Alex. Stay. Listen." Then silence. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the tower. I stared at the equipment, dread settling in my gut. Whatever was on the air tonight, it wasn't human, and it wanted me to listen. I needed answers. The logbook was still open on the desk,
The last entry, a jagged, unfinished warning. I flipped back through the previous pages, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. The handwriting changed over time, different texts, different years, but the last few weeks were all written by the same hand, Mark Heller, the technician I was sent to replace. At first, Mark's notes were routine, equipment checks, weather updates, minor repairs. But about 10 days ago, the tone shifted. Heard static on the backup channel. Thought it was just the wind, but it almost sounded like voices. Brushed it off. A few days later, voices again, louder this time. Couldn't make out the words, but it felt like they were talking to me. Saw someone near the fence last night, too tall, moved wrong, stayed inside. The entries grew more frantic. Woke up to the radio blaring at 3:12 a.m. Voices calling my name. Locked the doors. Can't sleep. Saw lights in the trees. Not flashlights. They flickered like fireflies, but blue. Heard laughter on the air. Not human. The final entry, dated 2 days ago, was barely legible, the pen digging into the paper. If you're reading this, don't answer the voices. They know things. They sound like people you love, but they're not. Don't go outside at night. Don't let them in. If you hear your own voice on the radio, run. The last line trailed off, ending in a jagged scrawl. I stared at the page, my pulse thudding in my ears. Mark hadn't signed out. There was no record of him leaving the site. I checked the shack for any sign of him. His bag, his tools, anything. But found nothing except a half-empty thermos and a crumpled pack of cigarettes. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. I sat back down, the logbook heavy in my hands. The warnings felt personal, as if Mark was speaking directly to me across time. I thought about the voice I'd heard, the way it had twisted my name, the laugh that didn't belong to any living thing. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, thick and impenetrable. The red beacon blinked overhead, a silent metronome counting down the hours until dawn. I closed the logbook, my hands trembling. I was alone on the mountain, surrounded by static and secrets. The only thing I knew for sure was that the voices weren't done with me yet, and night was just beginning. Night fell fast on the mountain, swallowing the last traces of daylight in a matter of minutes. The fog thickened, swirling around the tower's legs and creeping up to the shack's windows. I flicked on every light I could find, but the bulbs only cast pale, uncertain circles that seemed to shrink as the darkness pressed in. I tried to focus on the repairs, tracing cables and checking fuses, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time I glanced at the radio, the static seemed to pulse, rising and falling like a living thing. The logbook's warnings echoed in my mind. Don't answer the voices. Don't let them in. I was halfway through replacing a corroded connector when the lights flickered. The hum of the generator stuttered, then steadied, but the air felt colder, heavier. I heard a faint tapping at the window. Just the wind, I told myself, but I didn't look. The radio crackled, louder now. I tried to ignore it, but then a voice cut through the static, clear and sharp. Alex, it's me. Can you hear me?
I froze. The voice was my father's. Dead for 3 years, but unmistakable. I hadn't heard him say my name since the hospital, but here he was, speaking through the static, as if he were standing right behind me. Alex, please, I need your help. Come outside. My throat tightened. I pressed the mic, my voice barely a whisper. Dad? The reply came instantly, but the tone was wrong, too flat, too eager. Yes, son, I'm waiting. Just step outside. It's safe. I dropped the mic, heart hammering. The logbook's warning screamed in my head. They sound like people you love, but they're not. The lights flickered again, plunging the shack into darkness for a heartbeat before sputtering back to life. I heard footsteps crunching on gravel outside, slow and deliberate, circling the building. The radio hissed. Then another voice joined in, my sister's, then my old friends, each one pleading, cajoling, promising safety if I'd only open the door. I backed away from the window, clutching my flashlight. The voices grew louder, overlapping, twisting into a chorus of memories and regrets. They knew things, secrets I'd never told anyone, moments I'd tried to forget. Remember the lake, Alex? Remember what you did? I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the voices to stop. The static rose, drowning them out for a moment, but then a new voice cut through, my own, warped and hollow. Let us in, Alex. We're so cold. I stumbled to the door, checking the lock, then dragged a metal cabinet in front of it for good measure. The footsteps stopped, replaced with a slow, rhythmic capping on the glass. I pressed my back to the wall, every muscle tense. The radio fell silent, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the distant, steady pulse of the tower's beacon.
The tapping at the window grew louder, more insistent, as if the thing outside knew I was listening. I gripped my flashlight tighter, its beam trembling as I swept it across the cramped shack. The glass fogged with each tap, and then, suddenly, a shape pressed against it. A pale, elongated face, features blurred by the mist and darkness. "Alex," it called, the voice a warped imitation of my mother's, sweet and pleading. "It's cold out here. Let me in, honey." My mother had been gone for over a decade, but the voice was perfect, except for the undertone, a static-laced distortion that made my skin crawl. I backed away, heart pounding, as the figure's hand, too thin, too many joints, dragged slowly down the glass, leaving a trail of condensation. "Please, Alex, I'm so tired. I just want to come inside." I forced myself to speak, my voice shaking. "You're not my mother. Go away." The face twisted, the mouth stretching into an unnatural grin. The voice shifted, cycling through other people I'd lost. My childhood friend, my old boss, even my own voice, each one layered with that same static hiss. The figure circled the shack, tapping on each window, whispering my name. I heard it at the back door, then the side, then right above me, as if it was climbing the walls. The radio equipment flickered, dials spinning on their own, the speakers filling with a chorus of voices, some familiar, some not, all calling for me to open the door. I shoved a chair under the doorknob, my hands slick with sweat. The logbook's warning echoed in my mind. If you hear your own voice on the radio, run. The visitor's shadow stretched across the floor, impossibly long, as if the light itself was bending around it. The tapping stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Then, a whisper, right at my ear, though I was alone in the room. "Let us in, Alex. We're so lonely." I spun, flashlight beams slicing through empty air. The radio crackled, and for a moment, I saw a reflection in the glass. My own face, but the eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep. I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of equipment. The shack felt smaller, the walls closing in. I realized with a jolt that the visitor wasn't trying to break in. It was waiting for me to open the door myself. I pressed my back to the wall, every instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The only way out was through the thing that wore my mother's voice, my friend's laugh, my own desperate pleas. The visitor circled once more, then faded into the fog, leaving only the echo of its voice and the certainty that it would return. I was not alone on the mountain, and the night was far from over. The silence after the visitor left was worse than the voices. I sat in the shack, every light blazing, but the darkness outside felt alive, pressing against the thin walls. The radio static was constant now, a low, throbbing hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I tried to focus on the repairs, but my hands shook so badly I dropped my screwdriver twice. Every so often the static would shift, forming words that dissolved before I could catch them. Sometimes it was my name, sometimes a string of numbers, sometimes just a guttural, inhuman growl. I tried to tune it out, but the more I ignored it, the louder it became, as if the voices were feeding on my fear. I glanced at the window. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling in unnatural patterns. Shadows moved within it, tall, thin shapes that flickered at the edge of sight. I blinked, and they were gone. But the sense of being watched never left. Suddenly, the radio equipment powered on by itself. Dials spun, switches clicked, and the speakers blared a cacophony of voices, all overlapping, all wrong. Some spoken languages I didn't recognize, others mimicked people I knew, their words twisted and broken. "Alex, come outside, we're waiting for you. Don't you remember what you did? Let us in, let us in, let us in." The chorus built, rising to a peak pitch. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the voices were inside my head now, echoing off memories I tried to bury. I saw flashes. My father's funeral, my sister's accident, the night I left home for good. Each memory was warped, replayed with new, impossible details, as if the voices were rewriting my past. I staggered to the door, desperate for air, but stopped short. The shadows in the fog pressed closer, their forms shifting and merging, never quite solid. I realized with a sick certainty that they weren't just outside. They were in the static, in the air, in the very signal I'd come to repair. The radio speakers fell silent, replaced by a single clear voice. My own, but hollow and cold. "You can't leave, Alex. Not until you listen." The lights flickered, then died, plunging the shack into darkness. The only illumination came from the radio's display, glowing an unnatural blue. I watched, paralyzed, as the numbers on the frequency dial spun wildly, finally settling on a channel I'd never seen before. A new voice spoke, deeper and older than the others, resonating with a power that made my teeth ache. "Come to us, Alex. Find the source. We're waiting." The static returned, louder than ever, filling the shack with a sound like distant thunder. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, as the world dissolved into noise and shadow. I knew then that the voices weren't just trying to scare me. They wanted me to find them, and I was running out of places to hide. The static finally broke me. I couldn't stay in the shack any longer, not with the voices clawing at my mind and the darkness pressing in. I grabbed my flashlight and the logbook, shoving the door open and stumbling into the cold, wet air. The fog swallowed me instantly, muffling every sound except the distant, pulsing hum of the tower. I circled the base, searching for anything out of place. The red beacon blinked overhead, painting the world in brief flashes of crimson. My breath came in ragged bursts, each step crunching on gravel and wet pine needles. The static was louder out here, vibrating in my chest, guiding me toward the old service hatch at the tower's foundation. I'd seen it earlier, a rusted metal door, half buried in mud, marked with a faded warning, "Authorized personnel only." I pried it open, the hinges shrieking in protest, and descended a narrow staircase into the earth. The air grew colder, damper, the smell of mold and old electronics thickening with every step. At the bottom, I found a forgotten bunker, walls lined with ancient radio equipment and tangled wires. Dust coated everything, but the machines were alive, lights blinking, dials spinning, speakers hissing with static. In the center of the room stood a wall of old radios, each one tuned to the same frequency,
their speakers emitting a chorus of voices, layered and endless. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The voices overlapped, some whispering, some screaming, some chanting in languages I'd never heard. But beneath it all, I heard my own name, repeated over and over, each time in a different voice. My mother, my father, my childhood friends, even strangers I'd passed on the street.
I scanned the room, searching for the source. In the far corner, a console flickered with a sickly blue light. I approached, the static growing so loud it felt like it would split my skull. The console's screen displayed a single message, repeating in a loop. Tune in. Listen. Answer. I reached for the power switch, but the voices surged, pleading and furious. Don't turn us off, Alex. We're so close. Just listen. I hesitated, sweat freezing on my skin. The logbook's warning echoed in my mind. If you hear your own voice on the radio, run. But there was nowhere to run. The bunker felt like a tomb, the air thick with secrets and sorrow. I looked back at the wall of radios. For a moment, I saw faces in the static, distorted, shifting, but unmistakably human. Their eyes met mine, filled with longing and hunger. The static rose, drowning out my thoughts. I realized, with a jolt of terror, that the voices weren't just in the air. They were trapped here, bound to the signal, waiting for someone to set them free. My hand hovered over the console, torn between shutting it down and listening just a little longer. The voices begged, threatened, promised answers to questions I'd never dared to ask. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. The source of the signal was here, and it was awake, and it knew I was listening.
My hand trembled above the console's power switch, sweat beading on my brow despite the chill. The bunker's air was thick with static, the voices swirling around me, some pleading, some mocking, all desperate to be heard. The blue glow from the console painted my skin in ghostly hues, making the room feel even less real. "Stay with us, Alex," the voices whispered, overlapping in a cacophony of need. "We can show you everything. We can make you whole." I gritted my teeth, fighting the urge to listen. I remembered the logbook's warnings, the faces and the static, the way the voices had twisted memories and regrets into weapons. But curiosity gnawed at me. What if there were answers here? What if I could finally understand what had happened to Mark, to the others who'd vanished? I leaned closer to the console, watching as the frequency display flickered and shifted. The static faded for a moment, replaced by a single, deep voice, one I'd never heard before, but that resonated with a power that made my bones ache. "You are the first to find us in a long time," it intoned, each word vibrating through the floor. "We are the lost, the forgotten, the ones who answered when no one else would. Listen, and you will know." Images flashed behind my eyes, memories that weren't mine. A technician in the 1970s, hunched over a radio, his face pale with fear. A woman in the 1950s, weeping as voices called her name from the static. A soldier in the 1940s, tuning a field radio, his hands shaking as something inhuman spoke through the crackle. I staggered back, gasping. The voices pressed in, more insistent now. "Stay, Alex. We can give you knowledge. We can give you power. All you have to do is answer." I shook my head, reaching for the power switch. The static surged, the voices screaming in protest, the air growing thick and electric. Shadows writhed at the edge of the room, impossible shapes flickering in and out of existence. "Don't leave us," they howled, their words twisting into a storm of sound. "You're one of us now." I slammed the switch down.
The lights flickered, the radio sputtered, and for a heartbeat, the bunker was silent. Then, from the darkness, a single voice, my own, rose up, cold and hollow. "You can't shut us out, Alex. We're always listening." The static returned, louder than ever, rattling the walls and filling my head with 1,000 overlapping screams. I stumbled toward the stairs, desperate to escape, but the shadows followed, reaching for me with hands made of fog and memory. As I climbed, the voices faded, replaced by a single chilling promise. "We'll be waiting on the airwaves. We always are."
I staggered away from the bunker, lungs burning with cold air, the static still ringing in my ears. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling in unnatural patterns around the tower's legs. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam barely cutting through the gloom. My only thought was to reach the van, to get off this mountain before the voices found a way back in. But the world outside had changed. The path I'd taken down to the bunker was gone, swallowed by shifting shadows and dense mist. The tower's red beacon blinked overhead, but the light seemed farther away, distorted, as if the mountain itself was warping around me. I broke into a run, boots slipping on wet gravel, heart pounding. The radio in my pocket, my last link to the outside world, crackled to life. The voices returning, more urgent and desperate than before. "Don't leave, Alex. You belong here now." I tried to turn it off, but the switch wouldn't budge. The voices grew louder, overlapping, pleading and threatening in equal measure. "Stay with us. Listen. We can show you everything." "Run, and you'll never escape. We're in the air, in the wires, in your head." Shapes moved in the fog, tall and thin, flickering at the edge of sight. I stumbled, nearly falling as the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. Time stretched and twisted. One moment I was sprinting, the next I was crawling, the world spinning around me in dizzying loops. I saw flashes of the shack, the tower, the van, each one distorted, as if viewed through a broken lens. The voices pressed in, filling my mind with memories that weren't mine, regrets I'd never lived, fears I'd never spoken aloud. I reached the van at last, hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. The door was locked. I pounded on the window, desperate, but the glass only reflected my own face, pale, eyes wide, mouth moving in silent terror. The radio in my pocket screamed, the voices now a single unified chant. "Let us in! Let us in! Let us in!" I dropped the radio, covering my ears, but the voices were inside me now, echoing off every thought. I tried to start the van, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The dashboard lights flickered, then died, leaving me in darkness. I looked up, and in the rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing in the fog. Tall, thin, its face shifting through every person I'd ever loved or lost. It raised a hand, beckoning. I slammed my eyes shut, willing it all to stop. The voices faded, replaced by a single faint signal, a human voice, distant but real, breaking through the static. "Alex, if you can hear me, follow the path. There's a way down. Don't listen to them. Just run." I opened my eyes, hope flickering in my chest. The fog parted, revealing a narrow trail leading away from the tower, down the mountain. I grabbed my bag, left the useless radio behind, and ran. Chased by the voices, the shadows, and the knowledge that I might never truly escape what I'd heard on the air. I stumbled down the narrow path, branches clawing at my jacket, the ground slick with mud and pine needles. The mountain seemed to shift beneath my feet, the trail winding in impossible directions, but I clung to the memory of that faint, human voice on the radio. It was the only thing that felt real. Behind me, the static rose and fell, the voices growing more frantic as I moved farther from the tower. They pleaded, threatened, promised forgiveness and secrets, their words twisting into a storm of sound that battered my mind. "Alex, come back. You can't leave us. We need you." I pressed on, ignoring the voices, focusing on the crunch of gravel and the rhythm of my breath. The path grew steeper, the trees closing in, but the fog began to thin, and I caught glimpses of dawn breaking through the branches. My radio, battered and nearly dead, crackled to life one last time. I hesitated, then pressed the transmit button, my voice shaking. "This is Alex. I need help. I'm on Black Pine Mountain, near the old radio tower. If anyone can hear me, please..." The static surged, drowning out my words. The voices screamed, a chorus of rage and despair. But then, through the noise, a single, clear reply. "Alex, this is Ranger Collins. We've been searching for you. Keep moving down the trail. Don't stop for anything. We're waiting at the base."
Relief flooded me, but the voices fought back, their words turning venomous. "They're lying, Alex. There's no one waiting for you. Only us. Only the static." I ignored them, pushing forward as the path widened, the trees thinning. The tower's red beacon was just a memory now, a distant pulse in the fog behind me. As I broke through the last line of trees, I saw headlights. Real, solid, human. A ranger's truck idled at the edge of the forest, two figures waving me down. I ran, stumbling, collapsing into their arms as the voices faded to a distant whisper. They bundled me into the truck, wrapping me in a blanket, asking questions I could barely answer. I looked back at the mountain, the tower barely visible through the mist, and shuddered. The radio in the truck crackled just once, a single word slipping through the static. "Listen." I turned away, refusing to meet the eyes of the ranger, refusing to listen to anything but the sound of the engine as we drove away from the mountain, away from the voices, away from the signal that was never meant for human ears.
The world felt different after I left Black Pine Mountain, as if I'd crossed some invisible threshold. The ranger station was warm and bright, filled with the mundane sounds of coffee brewing and phones ringing. But I couldn't shake the cold that clung to me, or the sense that something had followed me down from the tower. They asked me what happened, but I could barely speak. I told them about the interference, the voices, the bunker beneath the tower. Ranger Collins listened, brow furrowed, but when I mentioned the logbook and the missing technician, his expression changed. "We've had a few techs go missing up there over the years," he admitted quietly, "but the company always says it's just the weather or people getting lost. They never mention anything about voices." I handed over the battered logbook, but when he flipped through it, the last pages were blank. No frantic warnings, no desperate scrawls, just empty paper. My heart sank. Had I imagined it all? Or had the mountain taken more than just my peace of mind? The company sent a car to pick me up. The supervisor barely looked at me as I returned the van and my equipment. "Tower is back online," he said, glancing at his clipboard. "No sign of any issues. You did your job." I tried to protest, to explain what I'd seen and heard, but he cut me off. "We get a lot of stories from that site. Static, weird signals, people seeing things in the fog. It's just the altitude. Get some rest, Alex." I left the office feeling hollow, the weight of the mountain pressing on my shoulders. My phone was still dead, and when I tried to call the ranger station later, the number was disconnected. At home, I found myself listening to the radio late at night, searching for any sign of the voices. Sometimes, in the static between stations, I thought I heard my name, or a faint, pleading whisper, but I never answered. I kept the logbook on my desk, its blank pages a silent reminder of what I'd survived. I told myself it was over, that I was safe. But deep down, I knew the signal was still out there, waiting for someone else to listen.
I wish I could see the story ended there, that I left the mountain behind and never heard the voices again. But some things don't let go so easily. Even now, as I sit in my apartment, the city lights flickering outside, I keep a radio on my desk, always off, but never far from reach. Sometimes, late at night, I hear static leaking from the speakers, even when the radio isn't plugged in. Sometimes I wake to the sound of my name whispered from the darkness, the same pleading tone I heard on Black Pine Mountain. I remind myself it's just my imagination, just the echo of a nightmare I can't quite shake. But then, last week, I got a package in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a battered cassette tape and a note. You listened. Now it's your turn to warn them.
I played the tape once. The recording was nothing but static at first. Then a voice, my own, warped and distant, repeating the same message over and over. Don't answer the voices. Don't follow the signal. If you hear your name, turn the radio off. I don't know who sent it. Maybe it was Mark or someone else who survived the mountain. Maybe it was just another trick, another echo from the static. But I'm passing the warning on, just in case. If you ever find yourself alone at night, tuning through the static, and you hear a voice that shouldn't be there, don't answer. Don't listen, no matter how much it sounds like someone you love. Some signals aren't meant for us. Some voices are only looking for a way in. And if you've ever heard something strange on the air, something you can't explain, share your story in the comments below. Maybe if enough of us speak up, we can drown out the static together. Just remember, the signal is still out there, and it's always listening.